Well, it's been quite the quick semester. Leadership, it's always been a concept to me that has come fairly easily. I think it started for me when I was playing baseball from such a young age, and then it kind of got better with hockey. I was always put in those roles because it came very natural to me. That being said, though, during the past few weeks during this class, delving into what leadership really is has been a very interesting thing for me between all of the concepts and theories we discussed in Humphrey's book and all of the things that Machiavelli talks about. Is it better to be feared or loved? It's been interesting kind of coming to the conclusions that I'm going to talk about throughout the video. But it's been interesting. I've really enjoyed kind of learning more about what being a leader really is and more about how leaders should be acting in order to get the best from the people that they're around. Over the past 6 months, I've been given a really interesting opportunity to kind of experiment and I guess kind of perfect what I see as a leader in my job. I've become a manager, and I did it for about 2 months, and it was really challenging. We went through a lot of different changes at the company I was working with, and figuring out new ways to kind of keep our team engaged and trying to motivate them to get them on my side, to get them to complete the goals that we're trying to get to on a daily basis was incredibly challenging at times. I really wish I had had the book that Humphrey wrote us then, because this book was actually really interesting and I saw a lot of things that I could really translate it to, especially in a daily basis. As leaders, we kind of have to really think about how we're motivating people and what's motivating ourselves. If your goals aren't really in line with the company that you're with, that can be pretty problematic. But once they are in line, you have to figure out the best way to get to that goal, and then you have to find the best way to motivate your team to get to that goal, which is something that I found really interesting that Humphrey talks about in the book. Um, some of the best things that I think he pointed out was that not every motivation tactic works for every person. You have to really diversify and find what works for every person, which is something that can be really difficult. But I think if you want to go above and beyond as a leader, that's something that's very important for you to do, is get to know every one of your employees, which is something that the book kind of touches on throughout the entire thing. It's being able to care on an individual level is going to do you wonders as far as motivating your people in the end, because it's going to be able, if you can get them to buy into you by buying into them, then they're going to work harder for you. I was at work one day and I was chatting with one of my customers, and he was telling me that he was a naval officer and he was a deck controller essentially on an aircraft carrier. And his crew worked harder for him because every night while they were around Florida, he would send them down to the Keys and they would go and have a blast and then come back, and they'd have to work again that morning, but they'd feel like they owed him, so they would work hard enough for him, which I thought was a really neat story that kind of really brings all of that together. Another thing that I think that leaders have to really focus on, especially as we're getting older and we're about to start stepping into these roles that we're trying to get into, is I think that we have to learn to control our emotions very well. The book talks about how our emotional intelligence, if you have a high emotional intelligence, it generally correlates with having better leadership ability. And I think that's a pretty true statement, just from things that I've seen in my life and in my professional life. Something that my father really tried to instill in me was being able to compartmentalize. And by compartmentalize, I mean focusing on the task at hand and not letting other things affect you. It is something that I really got to work on as growing up, because sometimes what's going on at home, you have to separate that from what's going on and you need to during the day, and you need to focus on your schoolwork, you need to focus on your homework and the sports that you're doing. And sometimes if it's really eating away at you, it can really affect like your performance, and that's not good, especially when we start stepping into these roles as leaders. You have to kind of check everything at the door that day, and you need to focus on what's going on in the office or on the field or in the classroom. It's something you have to get good at, especially as a leader. Another topic that really resonated with me this little semester that we just completed was impression management. Is really interesting to me because I always thought that being a leader was very, everyone always had their eyes on you, and you're essentially on a stage as a leader. You're setting an example every single moment of the day when you are there leading these people. Everything that you do, everything that you say, all of the emotions that you show are going to affect how people portray you, and it's going to affect how they think about you. And this can be generally challenging, and I think that this is where our emotional intelligence comes into play. If you're able to control how you're coming off to people and how your emotions are if you're able to control your emotions, I think that's going to make you a better leader. I've seen my managers come into work in a really bad mood, and it just kills the entire shift for the rest of the day, and that's really detrimental to a team. If you come into your job and you're excited to be there and you're ready for the day, it's going to really bring up the morale of the rest of your team. People feed off a really good energy, especially from leaders. And if you're a leader and you constantly come in and you're just not excited to be there, you're kind of just going through the motions, why would your team do anything other than that? You're not inspiring them to reach higher. You're not inspiring them to do better, and they're just going to do the bare minimum because that's what they see you doing. So I think that that's something that's really important. If you come in every day and you're giving it everything that you can, and people are seeing you put in those extra hours and they see you going above and beyond what's asked for as a leader, then that's something that they're going to do as well, especially if they really value what you're doing and they value the job that they're in. I want to talk about Machiavelli for a minute. His book is so interesting, and it's incredible to kind of think about when the book was written and how relevant it still is to this day. The fact that he saw these things in The Prince that he wrote, it's kind of a timeless book. I think, however, when we're looking at The Prince, this is a lot of the stuff that he talks about is kind of useful when you're coming into a new role as a leader. I think it's very important that when you're stepping into a new leadership role in a new position that you've never been in, you have to go by the book almost exactly when you're first getting there. You need to set the tone early on. You need to draw that line so people know what they're supposed to be doing, what the expectations are immediately, what's going to happen if you don't get to that, and why they're important. If you're not doing that, I think it's going to be really hard for you to adjust and get the best out of your people, as well as it's going to be really hard for your people to figure out what needs to be done as well. And that can be really stressful, and it's not going to be the best for everyone there. I think that Machiavelli saw that, though, and he figured out that it was really important, even back then as a prince and invading these new territories, that you needed to set that tone early. You needed to draw that line. And I think that's something as leaders that we're going to have to really execute, and that's going to be really hard. It was really hard for me when I was getting into this role at my job as a leader. It was really hard for me to step in there at 20 years old and kind of tell these people what to do, even though they've been doing it longer than I've even been alive in some cases. So I think it's really important that you have to be hard and you have to follow those guidelines and standards that are set in front of you in order to really make yourself successful and to be taken seriously as a leader. And in the long run, they're not going to see you as being successful. They're going to see you as being a jerk and maybe kind of just being very blunt. But you have to do that early on in order for you to be successful later. And I think that's it's a hard thing to do, especially at a young age, but I think if you want to be successful, you're gonna have to do it. Something else that really stuck with me from Humphrey's book was petty tyrants. Petty tyrants are something that I've kind of seen in my job over the past few months. We've had a new manager come in, and she's just, I don't know, sometimes I feel like she has it out for me, but it's it's ridiculous that she finds such little things to kind of make a big deal out of. And I think it's really detrimental to the team as well as your validity as a manager or a leader to just nitpick on the little things that don't matter. I think it's important to draw the line like Machiavelli and what I was just talking about, but at the same time, I think it's very important to empower your employees and give them the freedom to go above and beyond, to go that extra mile and really make your customer and your business happy, because that's going to giving them that freedom is going to allow them to find out what's going to work best. And I think that not giving them that freedom is hindering you and hurting your business more than helping. So that being that petty tyrant, I think, that's the last thing I think anyone should ever be in the workforce. Those were my big thoughts on the semester. It's been a good time, and I've really appreciated getting to do this with you guys, and I'll see you next time.